when we experience trauma, when it comes into our life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That trauma, that spirit of trauma, is actually seeking to reproduce itself, right? And to
Yes.
operate through us to traumatize others.
Other people.
Right?
Yeah.
So here's what happens. The body is trying to really deal with the trauma. You know, maybe a person was abused, or maybe
Yeah.
someone was molested,
Yeah.
right? This was not supposed to happen. It was not something that was a part of God's plan for their lives,
Right.
or whatever. But what happens is that now this person begins to react to the traumatizing experience.
Mm-hmm.
And in the wrong reaction or the overreaction to the trauma, it brings devastation to
Right.
that person.
Right.
And ultimately, in the devastation, it begets more and more trauma.
Because
Yeah.
when somebody is devastated like that,
Yeah.
then they begin to have other people who are loyal and have soul ties and friendships with that
Yes,
person
yes.
get on board, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened to you. And then
That's
they
right.
get traumatized because their loved one got traumatized.
That's right.
And then it goes on and it reproduces.
Absolutely.
And then pretty soon you have a whole bunch of people not only traumatized, but then
Yep.
now they're offended,
They're
at the
offended.
person that originally
Yeah.
traumatized their friend.
Absolutely.
They get bitter about it.
Yes.
And it becomes this big swirl where everyone is getting wounded now.
Absolutely.
You have a story about that, your
yeah,
wife.
yeah. I wanted to tell that story.
Yeah, tell that story.
So my wife years ago went through a traumatic experience.
Mm-hmm.
She was notified of just something very devastating happening to a loved one.
Mm-hmm.
And because this loved one was so close to her, when she heard about the devastation, she herself was traumatized.
Right.
And I think it's important for us to establish this, that when there is a soul tie, trauma can become transferable.
Right.
Trauma can transfer,
Yes.
even if it didn't happen to you.
Right. It becomes your trauma.
It's your trauma, you own it, because the bridge of that connection becomes a conduit through which that trauma enters your life.
It's a soul tie. So
It's a soul tie.
souls experience what other souls are experiencing.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly.
Okay.
And so because she was tethered to this situation the way
Yeah.
she was traumatized.
Right.
And one day she's cooking in the kitchen, and she's frying something, and the pan splash and hot oil gets all over her hand.
Ooh, okay.
This was at least a 2nd-degree burn, at
Whoa,
least.
okay.
She had her hand under the water for hours. It didn't do anything. She's screaming in pain. My wife has given birth to 5 children. I was there for all 5.
Okay, come on.
And some of them were natural births. And
Wow.
I've never seen my wife in this much pain in my
Wow.
life that I saw with that hand situation. And she's crying. And so we finally, take her to the hospital and everything. And, they give her medicine. And progressively, it becomes worse and worse and worse. Have you ever seen barbecue chicken?
Yeah.
How it bubbles and it's black and crispy? That's how her hand was.
Wow.
Skin is flaking off the hand.
Oh my gosh.
Literally flaking off the hand. And eventually it's subdermal exposure. So, my wife, who is of African descent,
Yeah.
hand looks like
My
yours,
hand.
right? I mean, and literally, it's not healing. So I called my sister. I say, what's going on? She looks at the pictures I sent. She says, this is not looking good. It's not healing.
And
like
she's a
it's
nurse.
supposed to."
Your sister's
She's a doctor.
A doctor. Okay, yeah.
She says, this is not looking good.
Right.
And I said, okay. And so I began to pray about this. And the Lord speaks to me and he says, Kynan, you need to address the spirit of trauma.
Come on.
And I said, okay.
Because
So-
trauma is a spirit.
Yes.
It's a tormenting spirit.
It's a tormenting spirit.
Yes.
So I go to my wife and say, listen, God told me to tell you that there's a spirit of trauma that entered into you
Whoa.
when you heard the news of the devastation. And that trauma also manifested when you were burned. And now that trauma, that spirit of trauma, is inhibiting the healing from taking
Whoa.
place. And so I took my wife through a prayer of healing and deliverance from the traumatic experience and the trauma of the burn.
Yep.
And I cast the spirit of trauma out of her hand.
Oh.
And when I did that, within days, her hand began to regenerate and heal.
Wow.
Now you can't even tell she was burned there.